Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to provide another installation into our Anti-Federalist Papers series going on number 28. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 27, I would highly encourage you to do so, because understanding the Anti-Federalist Papers in addition to the Federalist Papers will provide you a very advantageous and well-rounded understanding of the U.S. Constitution. And understanding the U.S. Constitution is absolutely necessary if you intend, if you intend to combat or defend against any sort of lawfare waged on you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Anti-Federalist Papers. Like I said, we're going on to number 28. There are multiple institutions from which you can get a paper and digital copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers. Go ahead and get both. While you're at it, if you haven't already, go ahead and get a paper and digital copy of the Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. Excellent. So number 28 is titled The Use of Coercion by the New Government, Part 3, really honing in on just how bad the U.S. Constitution is going to be. Again, this is according to the Anti-Federalists, and they're saying this back in 1787, 1788, before the U.S. Constitution was even implemented at all. So this essay was published in either the Philadelphia Freeman's Journal or the North American Intelligencer on January 16th, 1788. So he says this, and you have to remember, most of these, if not all, of the Anti-Federalist Papers were published under pseudonyms because, as just 2 or 3 papers ago, the Anti-Federalists, those who opposed the U.S. Constitution and its implementation, if they were to have given their real names, they would have been vilified and detested. Which honestly is already an indicator, a symptom that your government, that your culture is already dead. But nevertheless, that's why they gave the pseudonym instead of their real name, is because there would be probably pretty bone-chilling repercussions for ever dissenting against this, as the last paper used it, well-born class of individuals. So anyway, this author says this: the Congress under the new Constitution have the power, quote, of organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and of governing them when in the service of the United States, giving to the separate states the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. I bet most of y'all didn't know that. The U.S. Congress is actually supposed to provide funding and training for the militia. Who are the militia? The Federalists made very clear, Hamilton in particular, the militia are the citizenry. You. That's who the militia is. So if Congress isn't providing money, isn't providing funding, isn't providing training, arms to the states to train and discipline the militia, they're not obeying the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. The militia is meant, per the U.S. Constitution and the founders, including even Hamilton, to be equally armed as any U.S. military force, because the U.S. military force was supposed to be comprised of the state militias. Anyway, I digress. I'll let the Anti-Federalists show you just how silly this document is. Let us inquire why they have assumed this great power. Was it to strengthen the power which is now lodged into your hands and relying upon you and you solely for aid and support to the civil power in the execution of all the laws of the new Congress? Is this probable? Does the complexion of this new plan countenance such a supposition? When they unprecedentedly claim the power of raising and supporting armies, do they tell you for what purposes they are to be raised? How they are to be employed? How many they are to consist of, and where to be stationed? Is this power fettered with any one of those restrictions which will show they depend upon the militia and not upon this infernal engine of oppression to execute their civil laws? Good grief. The labels that they give a standing army in the Anti-Federalist Papers are so damning. This infernal engine of oppression. Good gravy. The nature of the demand in itself contradicts such a supposition and forces you to believe that it is for none of these causes, but rather for the purpose of consolidating and finally destroying your strength, as your respective governments are to be destroyed. They well know the impolicy of putting or keeping arms in the hands of a nervous people at a distance from the seat of a government upon whom they mean to exercise the powers granted in that government. Yeah. you didn't catch what he said there. They know how dangerous it is for a government to make uneasy or to bring angst to an armed citizenry. It's much more difficult for a tyrant to exercise tyrannical powers when the citizenry have the means to defend themselves against said tyrannical powers. And that seems commonsensical, but frankly, it hasn't yet been held or upheld and defended for very long in many instances of history that we have. They have no idea of calling upon or trusting to the party aggrieved to support and enforce their own grievances, notwithstanding they may select and subject them to as strict subordination as regular troops, unless they have a standing army to back and compel the execution of their orders. It is asserted by the most respectable writers upon government that a well-regulated militia composed of the yeomanry of the country, the yeomanry, that's you. If you're not sure what yeoman farming is, I don't know if we've done a lecture on it just yet. I know I've mentioned it in passing thought in preceding lectures, but yeomanry was, or yeoman farming in particular, is like a modern day, or was like a modern day landlord. So you would have a tenant, you would have an investor that would want to buy a parcel of land. The yeoman farmer, who, like the landlord, owned the plot, would lease that plot of land out to you, and you would keep if you wanted to farm it, if you wanted to till it, if you wanted to ranch it, if you wanted just a homestead, whatever profits you made, you would give a certain percentage of that to the yeoman farmer, so that way you could keep the plot, and of course the yeoman farmer could maintain that land, as well as get a piece of profit for himself. The yeomanry of the country, yeomanry is you, have ever been considered as the bulwark of a free people. Tyrants have never placed any confidence on a militia composed of free men. Go ahead and highlight that. That's a very important principle that we see throughout all of history. Experience has taught them that a standing body of regular forces, whenever they can be completely introduced, are always efficacious in enforcing their edicts, however arbitrary. And slaves by profession themselves are, quote, nothing loath to break down the barriers of freedom with a gout. No, my fellow citizens, this plainly shows they do not mean to depend upon the citizens of the states alone to enforce their powers. They mean to lean upon something more substantial. In summary, they have left the appointment of officers in the breasts of the several states, but this appears to me an insult rather than a privilege. For what avails this right if they at their pleasure may arm or disarm all or any part of all of the freemen of the United States, so that when their army is sufficiently numerous, they may put it out of the power of the freemen militia of America to assert and defend their liberties, however they might be encroached upon by Congress. It doesn't matter that the states will get to appoint the officers, because the freemen who compose the militia are going to be so underarmed, so under-equipped by the encroachments of the Congress. It's a fair point, and one that's come true. It's been true for nearly 2 centuries. So these gentlemen, very wise, and they're almost prophetic predictions of tyranny facilitated by the U.S. Constitution are bone-chilling. Does any, after reading this provision for a regular standing army, suppose that they intended to apply to the militia in all cases and to pay particular attention to making them the bulwark of this continent? Oh, but Mr. Anti-Federalist, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton said, do not worry about the standing army. That is nowhere near the intent of the U.S. Constitution. In fact, it's so absurd to make such a supposition. In fact, let's say, for the sake of argument, to use Mr. Madison's reply, a standing army does come about, which is completely unconstitutional and a federal encroachment. The able-bodied citizenry of the states would absolutely repel any sort of tyrannical ambitions. In fact, they would outnumber the standing army 1 to 10. I'm not kidding you, that's what Madison said. So how absurd of you to ask this question, Mr. Anti-Federalists? And would they not be equal to such an undertaking? Are they not abundantly able to give security and stability to your government as long as it is free? Are they not the only proper persons to do it? Are they not the most respectable body of yeomanry in that character upon earth? Have they not been engaged in some of the most brilliant actions in America and more than once decided the fate of princes? In short, do they not preclude the necessity of any standing army whatsoever unless in case of invasion? And in that case, it would be time enough to raise them For no free government under heaven with a well-disciplined militia was ever yet subdued by mercenary troops. That's a very key point. If you have a free men population, if you have a free government where all are armed, I mean, just remember why, I think it was the Japanese emperor, why in World War II the Japanese emperor said an invasion into the United States is likely never to occur. Why? Because of the terrifying U.S. Marine Corps? Because of the terrifying U.S. Air Force? Because of the terrifying U.S. Navy? No. Because behind every blade of grass is a citizen who is armed to the teeth. We, the citizenry, are the compelling force. We are what keep foreign invasions at bay. Not even at bay, in their own lands. That is what the Anti-Federalist is saying here. When you have a free men, when you have a free government, and those free men are armed to the extent and more sophisticatedly than the Union government, no enemy will be able to subdue. No enemy will be able to invade. No enemy will be able to capture them. It has been proven through history. It is proven through principle. That's what this Anti-Federalist is saying here. The advocates at the present day for a standing army in the new Congress pretend it is necessary for the respectability of government. One of the key arguments made by Hamilton. I defy them to produce, and John Jay, pardon my interjection, I defy them to produce an instance in any country in the old or new world where they have not finally done away with the liberties of the people. It's a fair question. Every writer upon government, Locke, Algernon Sidney, we're going to be going over his work in a future lecture, multiple future lectures. He was brilliant. Hampton, he was good as well. And a list of others have uniformly asserted that standing armies are a solecism in any government. That no nation ever supported them, that did not resort to, rely upon, and finally become a prey to them. That is so incredibly important. Highlight that. There has never been, ever, a single nation, a single body politic in all of history that has had a standing army that did not inevitably devolve into a despotism, into martial law, into tyranny. No Western historians have yet been hardy enough to advance principles that look a different way. What historians have asserted, all Grecian republics have verified. They are brought up to obedience and unconditional submission with arms in their bands. They are taught to feel the weight of rigid discipline. They are excluded from the enjoyments which liberty gives to its votaries. They, in consequence, hate and envy the rest of the community in which they are placed, and indulge a malignant pleasure in destroying those privileges to which they never can be admitted. Quote, without a standing army, says the Marquis of Beccaria, quote, in every society there is an effort constantly tending to confer on one part the height and to reduce the other to the extreme of weakness, and this is of itself sufficient to employ the people's attention. There is no instance of any government being reduced to a confirmed tyranny without military oppression. Highlight that as well. These are key principles of governance, of political science. And the first policy of tyrants has been to annihilate all other means of national activity and defense when they feared opposition, and to rely solely upon standing troops. Repeated were the trials before the sovereigns of Europe dared to introduce them upon any pretext whatever, and the whole record of the transactions of mankind cannot furnish an instance, unless the proposed constitution may be called part of that record, where the motives which caused that establishment were not completely disguised. Pisistratus in Greece, and Dionysius in Syracuse, Charles in France, and Henry in England all cloaked their villainous intentions under an idea of raising a small body as a guard for their persons. And Spain could not succeed in the same nefarious plan until through the influence of an ambitious priest, who have in all countries and in all ages, even at this day, encouraged and preached up arbitrary power, they obtained it. So do you remember when Thomas Paine said the popery of government is an abomination? That's why. Well, that plays part and parcel as to why. Depending on any class of men, or the well-born, is how you become a slave to a tyrannical government. And a standing army is a prerequisite to that enslavement. Guaranteed. Never been an instance in history showing to the contrary. Quote, Caesar, who first attacked the Commonwealth with mines, very soon opened his batteries. Notwithstanding all these objections to this engine of oppression, which are made by the most experienced men and confirmed by every country where the rays of freedom ever extended, yet in America, which has hitherto been her favorite abode, in this civilized territory where property is so valuable and men are found with feelings that when not patiently submit to arbitrary control, in this western region where, my fellow countrymen, it is confessedly proper that you should associate and dwell in society from choice and reflection, and not be kept together by force and fear, key tenet of a republican free government, you are modestly requested to engraft into the component parts of your constitution a standing army without any qualifying restraints whatever, certainly to exist somewhere in the bowels of your country in time of peace. It is very true that lawyer James Wilson, member of the Federal Convention, and who we may suppose breathes in some measure the spirit of that body, tells you it is for the purpose of forming cantonments upon your frontiers, and for the dignity and safety of your country as it respects foreign nations. No man that loves his country could object to their being raised for the first of these causes, but for the last it cannot be necessary. God has so separated us by an extensive ocean from the rest of mankind. He hath so liberally endowed us with privileges and so abundantly taught us to esteem them precious. It would be impossible, while we retain our integrity and advert to first principles, for any nation whatever to subdue us. We have succeeded in our opposition to the most powerful people upon the globe, and the wound that America received in the struggle, where is it? As speedily healed as the track in the ocean is buried by the succeeding wave. It has scarcely stopped her progress, and our private dissensions only, at this moment, tarnish the luster of the most illustrious infant nation under heaven. What a pretty description. I know a lot of the Anti-Federalist Papers are doom and gloom, but that was such a pretty description. Tarnish the luster of the most illustrious infant nation under heaven. You cannot help suspecting this gentleman, James Wilson, when he goes on to tell you, quote, that standing armies in time of peace have always been a topic of popular declamation, but Europe hath found them necessary to maintain the appearance of strength in a season of the most profound tranquility. Yes, and we left Europe. Well, not Europe, but the UK. And the UK was looking to unionize all of Europe. The US left the UK because of that reason, among a slew of other reasons. But because of that living under fear and complacence, rather than liberty and freedom. So all of the Federalists, they appeal to these European and British principles, practices, and policies, but it sounds like they would be happier living in Great Britain than trying to convert the liberty-oriented individuals of the Americas. This shows you his opinion, and that he, as one of the convention, was for unequivocally establishing them in time of peace, and to object to them as a mere popular declamation. But I will not, my countrymen. I cannot believe you to be of the same sentiment. Where is the standing army in the world that, like the musket they make use of, hath been in time of peace brightened and burnished for the sake only of maintaining an appearance of strength, without being put to a different use, without having had a pernicious influence upon the morals, the habits, and the sentiments of society, and finally taking a chief part in executing its laws? Doesn't that sound specifically pertinent to today? Standing armies have never been good or healthy for freedom, and you have to make that choice. You have to make that concession. Do you want comfortable, safe enslavement, or do you want dangerous, true freedom? You can't have both. If tyranny is at all feared, the tyranny of the many is to be guarded against more than that of a single person. The Athenians found by sad experience that 30 tyrants were 30 times worse than one. A bad aristocracy is 30 times worse than a bad monarchy, allowing each to have a standing army as unrestricted as in the proposed constitution. If the people are not in general disposed to execute the powers of government, it is time to suspect there is something wrong in that government, and rather than employ a standing army, they had better have another. For in my humble opinion, it is yet much too early to set it down for a fact that mankind cannot be governed but by force. What an excellent way to close. So That's all that gentleman had to say in number 28. If you have any questions about what he was saying in number 28, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding papers, or if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture is going to be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. Regardless of the topic of the next lecture, until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.